The police blatantly lied about a black woman in court. Then the FBI walked in with evidence that changed everything. I could almost taste the tension in the air when I first walked into that bustling courtroom. The glare of harsh fluorescent lights fell on me, Natalie Portman, as though I were a hunted creature on display. People craned their necks just to catch a glimpse, whispering rumors that the police had locked onto me as a prime suspect. Me, a young black woman from Raleigh, North Carolina, now painted as a criminal mastermind. Each time the judge's gavel struck, my pulse skyrocketed. But I had no idea how drastically things would change once the FBI stepped in with the kind of evidence that no one, least of all the lying officers, expected. Before we dive in, if you're new here, don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss an update. If you're excited about this story, let us know. If you enjoyed the video, press 1. If not, press 0. Your feedback really inspires me to gather more uplifting and meaningful stories. I grew up believing that America's justice system, while not perfect, was designed to protect ordinary citizens like me. My mother, Ramona, always told me, "Natalie, your voice matters. Use it to stand up for what's right." I carried that conviction through college at Howard University and into my professional life. I had never once doubted that truth would prevail if I ever found myself in a court of law. So on the day I walked into the E. Barrett Prettyman Federal Courthouse in Washington, D.C., I still clung to hope. Even as the rumor mill churned, Natalie Portman charged with assaulting a police officer, I thought surely the facts would exonerate me. After all, the alleged incident was captured on a body cam, wasn't it? Stepping through security that morning felt surreal. Uniformed officers searched my purse and patted me down with the same practiced indifference they likely gave to 1,000 defendants each day. Yet something in their eyes hinted they recognized me. My arrest the previous week had been widely publicized. Local police accuse black woman of attacking officer. The headlines alone had triggered heated discussions on cable news, Twitter, and even garnered a brief mention on Rachel Maddow's show on MSNBC. Once in the courtroom, my lawyer, Danielle Montgomery, gave me a reassuring nod. She was a public defender who refused to be intimidated by high-profile cases. Her dedication was evident in the lines of fatigue and determination etched across her face. From the defense table, I could see the prosecution's side settling in. Assistant District Attorney Trevor Giles was present, flanked by 2 uniformed officers wearing stern expressions. One of them, Sergeant William Hackett, was the officer I allegedly attacked. My heart pounded as the bailiff announced, "All rise for the Honorable Judge Alicia Marshall." We rose, and the hush that fell across the courtroom made the hairs on my arms stand on end. Judge Marshall took her seat, scanning the room with an impartial gaze, before calling the session to order. The charges read against me were severe: assaulting a police officer, resisting arrest, and disturbing the peace. If convicted, I faced potentially years behind bars. The evidence seemed stacked against me, especially the official police reports that labeled me the aggressor. But behind my fear, there was anger too. I knew I never assaulted anyone. I knew that if the body cam footage came out in full, it would show I was the one thrown to the pavement, left bruised and terrified. When Sergeant Hackett began his testimony, he painted a vivid picture of me as belligerent and violent, claiming I'd lunged at him in a fit of rage outside a local eatery. His voice never wavered, each sentence a polished piece of the official narrative. And it struck me cold. The police were blatantly lying. They were forging a tale to secure my conviction, my ruin, and there was nothing I could do about it at that moment but watch, powerless, as the story twisted around me. But somewhere beneath my despair, a small ember of hope glowed. I prayed that if there was a sliver of justice left, it would shine a light on the lies. Little did I know that the spark would come from an unexpected source, the Federal Bureau of Investigation. After the first day's proceedings, I left the courtroom feeling as though I'd aged 10 years. My lawyer, Danielle, tried to comfort me in the hallway, but her usual confidence was tinged with worry. "What they presented today was jarringly inconsistent with your account," she said, leading me away from the throng of reporters gathered near the entrance. Cameras flashed, and someone shouted my name, demanding a comment. My pulse raced, but I kept my head down. Danielle continued in a low voice. Sergeant Hackett's testimony was unusually well crafted. It's like they rehearsed every detail. I suspect their body cam footage might be missing or manipulated. I trembled, recalling that night. I'd just finished dinner with an old friend when I left the restaurant, only to find two officers rushing toward a group of teens on the sidewalk. One of the kids stumbled into me by accident, and next thing I knew, I was pinned to the ground. Hackett's claim that I was actively assaulting him made no sense. I'd been trying to shield myself. That footage is key, I said, voice cracking with emotion. They have to release it in discovery, right? In theory, Danielle conceded, chewing her lip. But if they claim the camera malfunctioned or the footage is lost, it'll boil down to your word against theirs. And you know how that usually goes. Her words sank like stones in my stomach. The next morning, we reconvened in the same courtroom. This time, the prosecution presented a short, grainy clip from what they called the only body cam footage available. It showed a chaotic scuffle on the sidewalk. The angle was poor, dark, shaky, but it seemed to support Hackett's version. I was shown moving suddenly, and the officer's camera jostled violently. Then, it cut out. I felt a cold sweat break across my forehead. The entire picture was being warped to make me look guilty. Danielle objected that the clip was suspiciously incomplete, but the judge only looked at her with resigned concern. Ms. Montgomery, if you have evidence to the contrary, you may present it. Otherwise, the officer's testimony stands. We didn't. All I had was my own memory, and the bruises to match. For the first time, I understood the magnitude of my predicament. The system seemed rigged, each step a carefully choreographed dance designed to convict me. By lunchtime, I was reeling. We had a recess, and Danielle and I retreated to a small cafe near the courthouse. The reflection of my face in the cafe window looked haunted, my eyes dull with exhaustion. She tried to reassure me that we'd find a way, that maybe someone in the crowd that night had video, but hope felt distant. That's when my phone buzzed. An unknown number. I answered warily, only to hear a quiet male voice on the other end. Natalie Portman. This is Special Agent Carter with the FBI. We need to talk immediately. My heart nearly stopped. The FBI? Why on earth would the FBI be calling me? Danielle's eyes widened as I recounted the brief conversation. The agent requested a private meeting, off the record. A swirl of dread and curiosity twisted in my gut. Could this be a lifeline, or just another trap in a system I no longer trusted? Either way, we had no choice but to find out, because if the FBI was stepping in, it meant something bigger was at stake, and I wondered if it might finally break the chain of lies strangling my life. The meeting with Special Agent Carter was arranged for that very evening. Danielle and I took a taxi to a nondescript federal building a few blocks away from the courthouse. A tired-looking guard buzzed us through to a cramped conference room with pale fluorescent lights that hummed incessantly, making it impossible to relax. Agent Carter was a tall, slender man with a calm demeanor. He introduced himself quietly and offered us coffee, which I declined. My stomach was already in knots. He closed the door, then sat across from us with a solemn expression. "I know you're on trial for allegedly assaulting an officer," he began. "We've been monitoring your case." I stiffened. "Monitoring my case? Why?" He exchanged glances with Danielle. "Let me cut to the chase. We suspect a pattern of fabricated evidence in your jurisdiction involving certain police officers, including Sergeant William Hackett. They've been under federal investigation for months now." My hands started to tremble, but I forced myself to breathe slowly. Danielle leaned forward, eyes narrowed in suspicion. "If you have that suspicion, why hasn't anything been done?" she asked. This could save my client from a wrongful conviction. Agent Carter sighed, rubbing his temples. "Our investigation is ongoing, and we needed more evidence. We couldn't jeopardize the operation with half-formed accusations. But Miss Portman's situation has become a flashpoint. The local department's fabrication is more blatant than usual. We think they rushed it because of internal pressure to quell public unrest about policing. A mixture of relief and anger coursed through me. So I wasn't crazy after all. Someone at a higher level saw the corruption for what it was. Yet, I was furious that the FBI had sat on this while I faced potential prison time. "So what exactly do you have?" I demanded, my voice sharper than intended. Carter slid a USB drive across the table. "This contains raw footage from that night. One of our undercover agents was in the vicinity, conducting surveillance on Hackett and his partner, Officer Ramirez. The camera captured everything from a different angle, an unfiltered record of the entire incident. Once you see it, you'll understand why we believe they lied." My throat went dry as I reached for the USB, but Danielle put a calming hand on my arm. "Are we allowed to use this in court?" she asked, fixing Carter with a piercing stare. He nodded, but with caution. "Yes, under certain conditions. The DOJ is reviewing the chain of custody, so it can be introduced without compromising our ongoing investigations. However, I want to be clear. If you use this, you'll be exposing our agent's identity. We'd prefer to keep that part sealed, but we understand what's at stake for Ms. Portman." I felt a jolt of hope. This was the evidence we so desperately needed. Finally, a chance to prove the truth. But it also meant tangling with an entire network that had apparently shielded these lying officers for who knows how long. As we left the building, the weight pressing on me felt a fraction lighter. A new door had opened, but with it, the stakes shot sky high. If the FBI had infiltrated the local police, then I wasn't just up against a single officer's word. I was standing in the crossfire of a complex operation, and the ramifications could be explosive. That night, Danielle and I huddled in her small office, lights dimmed, the blinds drawn. She'd borrowed a secure laptop from a colleague, one with no connections to the local internet network. She insisted we needed to be careful with how we handled the FBI's footage. When she inserted the USB drive, my heart hammered so fiercely I worried it might leap out of my chest. A media file popped up, labeled with a date and timestamp matching the night of my arrest. Danielle clicked it, and the video played. There, in stark clarity, was the street outside the restaurant. The angle appeared to be from a vantage point inside a parked car. I could see me, my silhouette as I stepped away from the exit, the group of teens milling about nearby. Then, from off-screen, Hackett and Ramirez rushed in. It was unsettling to watch a moment from your life, as if you were an outsider. But I forced myself to focus. In the unfiltered recording, the officers shoved through the teens. Then Hackett turned on me. I heard his voice laced with tension. "Stay back." The footage showed me raising my hands defensively, confusion evident in my posture. Then, in a fluid and brutal motion, Hackett seized my wrist and slammed me down onto the sidewalk. I cried out, struggling to shield my face. The most damning part came next. Ramirez muttered something about, "Gotta make an example," and Hackett responded, "Let's say she swung at us." My stomach lurched. This was the exact moment they orchestrated the lie that would become the basis of my prosecution. My skin prickled with rage and vindication. The raw, undeniable truth played out in real time. I never attacked them. They attacked me. They concocted the assault narrative on the spot. Then, the camera angle shifted as the hidden observer apparently tried to remain unseen, ending the clip with a shaky blur of streetlights. Silence fell in the office. My cheeks were hot with anger, but I also felt tears threatening to break free. Danielle exhaled slowly, her hand clutched over her mouth. She ejected the USB and placed it in a small evidence bag. "My God, Natalie," she whispered, it's horrifying." We both knew what we had here was more than just exculpatory evidence. It was proof of a systemic pattern, how easily a pair of officers could manipulate the narrative to destroy a life. If the FBI had similar footage for other cases, it meant countless people might have been wrongfully charged or convicted. I thought of all the faces I'd seen on the news, or the activists protesting with signs reading, "We want justice." Those stories were more than hashtags. They were real heartbreaks. And now I held the ultimate piece of evidence that could, if leveraged correctly, topple more than just a single court case. But a shadow of caution crept in. I remembered Carter's warning. Using this video in open court would blow the cover of an FBI operation. It could place their agent in danger, compromise ongoing investigations, and yet, what choice did I have? My life, my freedom, and my reputation hinged on telling the truth. I said a silent prayer for strength. Tomorrow, we'd present this revelation in court, and that was when the true battle would begin. The next morning I arrived at the courthouse in a haze of anticipation and dread. My head swam with the memory of that footage, the proof of my innocence, and the knowledge that we were about to drop a bombshell in a system not exactly known for kindly accepting challenges to its authority. The media presence outside was thicker than ever. I shielded my face from the flashing cameras, ignoring the barrage of shouted questions. The phrase, "police lying," was scrawled in bold headlines on some of their notepads. Clearly, word had leaked that something significant was about to happen in my trial. Even so, the exact nature of the evidence was still under wraps. Inside, Danielle marched confidently toward the defense table, not even glancing at the prosecution. I followed, trying to steady my nerves. There sat Sergeant Hackett, smug as ever, his uniform immaculate, his eyes scanning the room with practiced self-assurance. I felt a surge of fury, remembering how he'd slammed me onto the pavement and then lied as easily as breathing. "All rise," the bailiff intoned. Judge Marshall entered, her black robe sweeping around her ankles. She took her seat and began the usual preliminaries. Then the prosecution stood, launching into more testimony from Hackett. He repeated the same story from the day before, doubling down on his lies. When Danielle's turn came, she rose with the controlled poise of someone holding an ace in her hand. "Your Honor, the defense would like to introduce newly discovered evidence, video footage that directly contradicts Sergeant Hackett's testimony." A hush rippled through the courtroom. Hackett's face darkened. The prosecutor, Giles, straightened his shoulders, but I caught a flicker of anxiety in his eyes. Judge Marshall leaned forward. "Is this footage from a bystander's camera?" Danielle's gaze flicked to me. "No, Your Honor. It was obtained through lawful means, but to maintain the privacy of the source, we'd like to request a sealed proceeding for its review." Giles objected instantly. "We need full disclosure of the origin. The chain of custody is in question." Danielle persisted. "We have chain of custody. However, revealing the full details of that chain would compromise an ongoing federal investigation. We're prepared to show the court, in camera, how the evidence was obtained lawfully. For now, we ask that it be admitted for your review." Judge Marshall frowned, obviously torn between procedure and the potential significance of the footage. After a moment's pause, she nodded. "Very well. I'll permit an in-camera inspection of this evidence. The jury and spectators will be temporarily excused." A murmur of surprise swept through the gallery. One by one, people filed out, including the reporters, while Hackett and the prosecutor conferred urgently in hushed tones. The judge beckoned us to approach the bench, and after a brief discussion, we moved into her private chambers with a laptop and the evidence bag. My pulse drummed in my ears as Danielle set up the video. Hackett and Giles stood off to the side, arms crossed, tension radiating from them. Once the footage played, the entire dynamic shifted. Judge Marshall's expression hardened, her lips tight, her eyes flicking to Hackett in disbelief. Giles paled, swallowing visibly. In that small enclosed room, the police's charade was laid bare. There was no question about the authenticity of the video. It was me, being attacked, the officers forging their account on the spot. I couldn't tear my eyes from Hackett. He stared at the floor, as though he could will the footage away by not looking. A sense of triumph surged through me, and yet there was also sorrow. How many others had these officers similarly persecuted, with no hidden camera to save them? Judge Marshall quietly ended the video, exhaling a sharp breath. "Sergeant Hackett, do you have an explanation for this discrepancy?" Hackett stammered, eyes flitting to Giles, who offered no rescue. That footage it's not official. It must be doctored." The judge's gaze was stone cold. "We'll see what the FBI has to say on that." At the mention of the FBI, Hackett's composure crumbled. I realized with a jolt he must have known the feds were sniffing around. The carefully constructed lie was about to collapse, and I was about to get my life back. When we returned to open court, I could sense the shift in energy. Judge Marshall announced that certain evidence had been reviewed in camera. She remained tight-lipped about the specifics, but her entire bearing toward Hackett changed. She instructed him to step down from the stand, eyes fixed on him in a way that suggested the truth was no longer in doubt. The court then broke for a recess, allowing the prosecution team to huddle with the judge in chambers. Danielle and I waited at the defense table, my nerves rattling from the emotional roller coaster. I kept sneaking glances at Hackett, who'd retreated to the far end of the room, face contorted in anger and fear. Reporters milled about in the hallway, speculating on what had transpired behind closed doors. Word traveled fast in a courthouse, and I overheard a snippet. "They say the defense has a bombshell video that nails the cop." My stomach flipped. This was exactly the outcome I'd prayed for, that the truth would pierce the lies. Just when I thought my relief could deepen no further, the courtroom doors swung open with a sudden burst of commotion. Two individuals in dark suits strode in, flashing badges. Even from the defense table, I recognized the gold lettering FBI. One of them was Agent Carter. He exchanged a look with Danielle that said, "We had no choice." The second agent, a woman with a crisp ponytail, made a beeline to the front of the courtroom. The bailiff stood, unsure how to react, but the judge stepped out of her chambers just in time. "Your Honor," Agent Carter addressed her respectfully, "we have newly declassified information relevant to these proceedings. We request permission to submit it to the court immediately." Judge Marshall hesitated, then nodded. "This is highly irregular, but given the circumstances, proceed." The agents placed a thick file on the judge's bench. Then Carter turned to the prosecution. "Our office has been investigating allegations of police misconduct, including falsified reports and doctored body cam footage. We have reason to believe that Sergeant Hackett and others systematically framed individuals, particularly in communities of color, to boost arrest statistics and protect certain interests within the department." A hush blanketed the room. My heart pounded so loud I thought everyone must hear it. Hackett sputtered, "Objection! They can't just barge in here and accuse—" "Overruled," the judge said in a clipped tone, eyes flicking over the newly provided documents. "I'll allow them to speak." Agent Carter continued, "We've acquired statements from multiple officers willing to testify that Sergeant Hackett coerced them into altering or destroying evidence. Additionally, we have ballistic reports, dispatch logs, and high-resolution footage that contradict his official statements in at least 4 different cases, including this one." He paused, casting a sympathetic glance in my direction. "In Mrs. Portman's case, we can confirm beyond any doubt that she was the victim, not the aggressor." My breath caught in my throat. The FBI had all the receipts. This wasn't just one piece of footage. They had an entire trove of evidence. A flash of recognition crossed Hackett's face, and I saw a flicker of panic. He must have realized that not only was he about to lose this particular case, but the entire facade of his career was crumbling before his eyes. Judge Marshall inhaled deeply. "I will review this new evidence, but based on what I've already seen in camera, it appears we have a grave situation." She turned to Giles. "Mr. Giles, the prosecution will have to consider whether it can move forward with these charges at all." Giles, cornered by the avalanche of the FBI's revelations, looked as though he'd swallowed a hornet. "Your Honor, the state moves to dismiss the charges against Ms. Portman, pending further investigation." He said it through clenched teeth, eyes avoiding mine. It was over. My entire body sagged with relief, tears threatening to spill. I was free. The police's lies, Hackett's lies, had been shattered under the weight of federal evidence. But as triumph lit inside me, I also felt rage. Rage that it had to come to this level of drama to expose the truth. Rage at how close I'd come to being another statistic, rotting in prison for a crime I never committed. Karma, it seemed, had arrived, and it was about to hit back harder than any of us anticipated. The moment the charges against me were dismissed, I felt a wave of relief so profound it was like I could breathe freely for the first time in weeks. But the emotional whiplash remained. Anger, exhaustion, gratitude, and a lingering wariness of what might happen next. Judge Marshall addressed me directly. "Mrs. Portman, you are free to go. However, I must caution you that this court will continue to investigate the circumstances leading to these wrongful charges. Sergeant Hackett's testimony is now in serious question. Rest assured we will seek accountability." My body trembled. "Thank you, Your Honor," I managed, voice unsteady. I glanced across the courtroom. Hackett stood with his fists clenched, eyes darting about as though searching for an escape. The FBI agents quietly conferred with the prosecutor, Giles, who looked tense. The gallery filled with reporters who jotted notes and snapped pictures, capturing every nuance of this unfolding scandal. Before I could leave, Giles approached Danielle and me. "We had no idea about Hackett's misconduct," he claimed, though his tone suggested a desperate attempt to salvage his own reputation. "If we'd known about the FBI's investigation—" Danielle cut him off, frustration boiling over. "But you didn't bother to investigate the gap in the body cam footage, or how the official report was riddled with inconsistencies. If Ms. Portman hadn't had the FBI's help, she'd be facing prison." Giles' cheeks reddened. "I'll recommend your record be expunged immediately," he offered quietly. I truly am sorry." He looked at me, eyes pleading for forgiveness. Perhaps he realized that bungling such a public case could cost him his career. I gave a curt nod. I didn't have the energy to muster a gracious response. My life had been upended. No apology, however sincere, could erase the trauma. Still, I was relieved to see at least some regret in his eyes. Danielle guided me toward the hallway. The second we stepped outside the courtroom, the press pounced. Microphones, flashing bulbs, and a barrage of voices. "Natalie, how does it feel to be cleared? Did the police really lie? What are your next steps?" I froze, overwhelmed. Danielle raised her hand, calling for calm. "Ms. Portman has been exonerated. The details will emerge as the investigation continues. She has no further comment at this time." We wove through the throng, my legs quivering beneath me. I spotted Agent Carter by the elevator, speaking in a low tone to his partner. His gaze landed on me, and he offered the slightest nod, an acknowledgement that justice had, at least partially, been served. I managed a shaky smile in return. Without the FBI's intervention, I would still be drowning in false accusations. The elevator ride down felt interminable. My lawyer's phone was buzzing nonstop with calls from potential supporters, activists, and even a few national media outlets. By the time we emerged into the ground floor lobby, I realized my once private life had been obliterated by public attention. Yet a spark of determination burned in me. If I could turn this nightmare into a catalyst for change, perhaps that would be my silver lining. As Danielle and I exited the courthouse, I saw a small crowd of protesters gathering, some holding signs reading, "Justice for Natalie." Others chanted, "Prosecute police corruption." Tears pricked my eyes. I wasn't alone in this fight. And maybe, just maybe, our collective outrage would spark accountability, not just for Hackett, but for every bad actor who exploited the badge and the law to harm innocent lives. Back at Danielle's law office, we settled into worn leather chairs, the tension slowly easing from our bodies. She flicked on a small TV in the corner to check the news coverage. Sure enough, local stations had already picked up the story. Charges dropped against Natalie Portman after FBI presents new evidence. The headline crawled across the screen, accompanied by a grainy photo of me, one clearly taken in the heat of the moment, eyes brimming with tears. I watched in silence as pundits dissected the bombshell revelations. One commentator argued that this is yet another instance where oversight on police misconduct is sorely lacking. Another suggested the FBI's involvement indicated deeper corruption in the force. I felt a swirl of conflicting emotions. Relief that truth was emerging, anger at how widespread the problem might be, and dread over potential backlash. Danielle muted the TV. "This is going to be big," she said, exhaling heavily. "You're going to be a symbol, Natalie. People will reach out to you, lawyers representing others who say they were framed, activists calling for reforms." My pulse quickened, but I'm not a lawyer or a politician. I'm just someone who almost got railroaded by lies. She leaned forward, hands clasped. "Exactly, and that's why your story matters. The FBI investigation won't stay limited to your case. If Hackett and his cronies have been doing this for years, we might see a wave of exonerations. The department could face a federal probe. The city might have to settle lawsuits. It's going to be a storm, and you're in the eye of it." I nodded, biting my lip. As overwhelming as it felt, I couldn't just walk away. Dozens, maybe hundreds of innocent people could still be behind bars based on similar lies. Even if I didn't want to be a public figure, it seemed destiny was steering me there. A knock sounded at the office door, startling both of us. Danielle opened it to reveal Agent Carter. He greeted us quietly, stepping inside with an air of urgency. "I apologize for interrupting, but there's been a development. The local police chief is holding a press conference in an hour, reportedly to address the allegations. We suspect they might throw Hackett under the bus to save themselves." My jaw clenched. "They'll claim it was just one bad apple, right?" The typical script. Carter shrugged, looking weary. "We're prepared to counter that narrative. The FBI has evidence that suggests a broader pattern. I just wanted to let you know that once the chief goes public, the media frenzy will intensify. People might swarm you for interviews or to use your case as a rallying point." Danielle glanced at me, assessing my emotional state. I squared my shoulders. "Let them swarm," I said quietly. "I won't hide. They need to hear what actually happened." Carter offered a small smile. "I admire your courage. If you're open to it, the Bureau would like you to speak at a future hearing on civil rights violations within law enforcement. It's part of a DOJ task force. You might help shape policy reform." Help shape policy? My breath caught. A week ago, I was a terrified defendant. Now, the U.S. Department of Justice was inviting me to testify about systemic reform. The magnitude of it all left me speechless. But beneath the shock, I felt something new, a sense of purpose. If going public with my story could prevent others from suffering the same fate, maybe it was worth the upheaval. Maybe my ordeal could serve a higher purpose after all. We decided to watch the police chief's press conference from Danielle's office. Agent Carter stayed with us, offering insight on what might happen next. The TV blinked to life, showing the chief, a middle-aged man with a stern expression, standing behind a podium framed by flags. "I want to address the allegations that have recently come to light concerning Sergeant William Hackett," the chief began, voice serious. "First and foremost, our department takes any claim of misconduct extremely seriously. In light of new evidence presented in court, we have placed Sergeant Hackett on unpaid administrative leave, pending a thorough internal investigation." He paused, glancing at the reporters. One shouted, "Isn't it true the FBI has evidence implicating more officers?" The chief pursed his lips. "We have not been officially informed of any broader issues. However, if further misconduct is discovered, we will respond accordingly. One bad officer does not reflect the values of our department." Agent Carter snorted. "Typical denial. We've been sending them memos for months, but they're going to play ignorant until we drop the hammer." I clenched my fists, outraged by the chief's whitewashing. He's basically dismissing all this as just Hackett's wrongdoing. Danielle placed a hand on my shoulder. "It's infuriating, but we anticipated this." On screen, the chief's speech continued. He vaguely alluded to procedural errors that might have affected my arrest. "We are deeply concerned about what happened to Ms. Natalie Portman. We regret any distress caused to her and her family, and will fully cooperate with the District Attorney's Office regarding her case." A lump formed in my throat. Regret? That was an understatement for what they'd put me through. The press conference ended shortly after. Then came the question and answer session with city officials deflecting blame left and right. Agent Carter switched off the TV, exhaling in frustration. "This is exactly why we're stepping in," he said. "The city's leadership is either complicit or terrified of rocking the boat. Ms. Portman, would you consider going public, perhaps at a separate press conference, to share your first-hand experience? It could put pressure on them to conduct a genuine purge of corruption." Danielle looked at me, eyebrows raised. "It's risky. You'll be under a massive spotlight, but it might also protect you, making it harder for them to retaliate in secret." Retaliation. The idea chilled me. Hackett was still out there, likely desperate to cling to his position. Others in the force who'd aided him might see me as their downfall. But I'd come this far. The charges were dropped, and the truth was out. Backing down now felt like betrayal, both to myself and to others who'd never had their innocence proven. I swallowed hard. "I'll do it. Let's hold a press conference." Agent Carter nodded, a steely resolve in his eyes. "We can coordinate with the DOJ's Civil Rights Division. They'll help ensure you have protection, and if you mention your willingness to testify at a federal level, the city might scramble to show they're taking reform seriously." A swirl of fear and adrenaline coursed through me. I pictured the cameras, the microphone, the hail of questions. But I also pictured the countless faces of people who'd been wronged. Maybe this was my chance to make a difference. And I realized with stark clarity, my fight wasn't just about clearing my own name anymore. It was about wielding the truth to tear down the walls of lies that had trapped so many for so long. The next day, we arranged to hold the press conference on the steps of the very courthouse where I'd been cleared. It felt symbolic, a statement that the justice system, while flawed, had room for truth to prevail. A podium was set up on the marble landing, flanked by cameras and reporters from local and national outlets. A small crowd of activists gathered behind the barricades, holding signs that read, "End Police Lies" and "Justice for All." The swirling mix of nerves and determination in my gut felt almost electric. Danielle stood beside me, looking resolute in her navy blazer. Agent Carter hovered discreetly in the background, accompanied by a couple of other FBI personnel. I took a deep breath, stepping up to the microphone as the camera shutters clicked incessantly. "Good afternoon," I began, voice echoing slightly in the open air. "My name is Natalie Portman. Until yesterday, I was on trial for allegedly assaulting a police officer. Many of you have heard that the charges were dropped when new evidence came to light." I paused, the faces in the crowd a blur of anticipation. "I'm here to tell you what really happened. Sergeant William Hackett lied about me attacking him. He and his partner forcibly threw me to the ground and then claimed I was the aggressor. They edited or destroyed their body cam footage. They wrote false reports. If not for undisclosed video evidence, I would be facing years in prison." A hush fell, broken by the soft clicks of cameras. I pressed on, my voice gathering strength. "I've since learned that my case is not an isolated incident. The FBI has uncovered patterns of fabricated evidence involving Hackett and possibly other officers. This is not about one man. This is about a system that enables these abuses to continue unchecked." I glanced over at Danielle, who nodded encouragingly. "I stand before you not just for myself, but for every innocent person who never had the chance to prove they were framed. I will be cooperating fully with federal authorities and testifying before a Department of Justice hearing. My hope is that real reforms will emerge, not just lip service, to ensure no one else endures this ordeal." The crowd stirred, some applauding, others wiping away tears. One reporter shouted a question, "Mrs. Portman, are you planning to sue the police department for damages?" I nodded slowly. Yes, my lawyer and I are exploring all legal avenues, including a civil lawsuit for wrongful arrest and excessive force. But to me, the bigger goal is systemic change. Monetary compensation won't stop these abuses if the culture doesn't change. Another voice rang out. What do you say to Chief Halston's statement that Hackett was a lone wolf? I set my jaw. I think calling him a lone wolf ignores the fact that others helped cover his tracks. I want a thorough investigation so the truth comes out. I'm urging the department and the city's leadership not to hide behind one scapegoat. As I finished, applause swelled. I stepped back from the podium, heart pounding. Danielle gave my hand a supportive squeeze. In that moment, I felt a surge of empowerment, tempered by the raw awareness that this was just the start of a long, uphill battle. But at least I wasn't fighting in the shadows anymore. The world was watching, the truth was out, and that, perhaps, was the most potent weapon of all. Within hours of the press conference, the story exploded nationally. Natalie Portman cleared. FBI exposes police lies, read one headline. Cable news channels debated the implications. Some anchors framed it as a watershed moment, while others cynically questioned if the problem really extended beyond a single officer. The phone at Danielle's office rang constantly. Calls from civil rights lawyers, community activists, and even a few state legislators offering support. Amid this whirlwind, a request arrived from the Justice Department. They asked if I would appear at a preliminary committee hearing in 2 weeks to share my first-hand account. The hearing was part of a broader probe into policing practices, specifically focusing on allegations of racial profiling and evidence tampering. Danielle was all for it. Agent Carter assured me the Bureau would arrange security and a thorough briefing. Despite the high-profile attention, I still had pockets of free time when the cameras weren't on me, moments when I'd collapse on my couch at home, mind spinning. My apartment had become a refuge, albeit one I seldom used during the chaos of the trial. One evening, I found myself pacing the living room, phone in hand, calling my mother. She'd been my rock all my life, and hearing her voice felt like coming up for air. "I'm so proud of you, baby," she said warmly. "You're turning this terrible situation into something meaningful. That's my girl." Her words lit a gentle warmth in my chest. "Thank you, Mom. But sometimes I'm scared. Hackett is still out there, probably furious, and who knows how many of his buddies might blame me for exposing them." She let out a soft sigh. "Fear is natural, honey, but you got the truth on your side, and the truth is bigger than any single man with a badge. God's got you." I let those words sink in. They weren't a perfect shield, but they gave me a sense of solace. After we hung up, I scrolled through social media. My story was trending under several hashtags like Mass Justice for Natalie, Police Accountability, and Us FBI Exposes Lies. Strangers had flooded my mentions with messages of support, while a vocal minority spewed hate. The duality was overwhelming, a stark reminder that not everyone believed in my innocence, even with evidence. The next morning, my alarm dragged me awake before dawn. I had a schedule packed with interviews and meetings, culminating in a follow-up with Agent Carter. Over coffee, I pulled up news reports. My eyes were drawn to a breaking story. Sergeant Hackett resigns amid internal investigation. The accompanying snippet stated that Hackett's lawyer had advised him to step down, likely in hopes of reducing potential legal liability. A grim satisfaction coursed through me. Hackett had fallen from grace, but his resignation was hardly justice for the countless lives he'd harmed. Still, it was a start. I couldn't help a wry smile. Hard karma, indeed, was coming for him. I texted Danielle a screenshot. "Hackett resigned. What's next?" Her reply came almost instantly. "He's definitely facing criminal charges. This is just the beginning." Reading those words, I felt a ripple of hope. Maybe, for once, the system would hold a corrupt officer truly accountable. It wouldn't undo the trauma, mine or anyone else's, but it would set a precedent. And as the next wave of tasks beckoned me, I resolved not to waste the opportunity to push for deeper, lasting change. 2 weeks later, I found myself standing outside a grand hearing chamber in a federal building that dwarfed even the courthouse in its stately grandeur. Tall columns lined the facade, and inside, the halls were polished marble that echoed each footstep like a drumbeat announcing my approach. Danielle stood beside me, impeccably dressed and radiating calm professionalism. Agent Carter greeted us, dressed in a suit rather than the more casual attire I'd seen him wear before. He explained that we'd be called to testify in front of a panel of lawmakers and Department of Justice officials. They were investigating not just my case, but also the broader misconduct the FBI had uncovered in law enforcement agencies nationwide. My heart thudded in my chest as an usher signaled it was time. Danielle gave my hand a reassuring squeeze. "You can do this," she whispered. I followed her into the hearing room, which was arranged like a congressional committee session. Rows of seats for spectators, a dais where the panel members sat, and a desk with microphones for witnesses. A hush fell as we approached, cameras rolling from the back. Among the panel were senators, civil rights experts, and high-level DOJ attorneys. As we settled behind the witness table, the chair of the committee, Senator Ramirez, ironically no relation to the officer Ramirez from my ordeal, welcomed us. "Miss Portman, thank you for agreeing to testify today. Please raise your right hand." I took the oath, hand trembling slightly. Then I sat down, trying to project confidence I only partially felt. Senator Ramirez leaned forward. "We understand you were recently exonerated in a false assault charge involving a police officer. Could you share your experience and how it reflects on broader policing issues?" I cleared my throat. "Yes, Senator. My name is Natalie Portman, and I want to emphasize that I had no criminal record prior to this incident. On the night of my arrest, Sergeant Hackett and his partner physically assaulted me without provocation, then wrote a false report claiming I attacked them. If not for the FBI's undercover footage, I would likely have been convicted. During my trial, the police withheld or tampered with body cam evidence. This was not an isolated mistake. It was a coordinated lie." I paused, ensuring my voice remained steady. The FBI's investigation revealed that Hackett's actions were part of a pattern, targeting individuals, especially in minority communities, to inflate arrest statistics and hide questionable uses of force. My story could have been anyone's story, and that terrifies me. Another committee member, a DOJ official, asked gently, "How did this experience affect you personally?" My throat tightened. It was devastating. I lost my sense of safety, my trust in the system. I was vilified in the media. My family was harassed. Even now I worry that other officers who shared Hackett's mindset might retaliate. But more than anything, it opened my eyes to how vulnerable we all are when those sworn to protect us can so easily fabricate evidence. A ripple of empathy spread across the panel. I saw a few nod in agreement. Senator Ramirez thanked me, then turned to Danielle for her legal insights. She explained how the system often defers to police accounts, leaving defendants with little chance if they can't produce independent evidence. "We need standardized procedures for preserving footage, stronger repercussions for falsifying reports, and better oversight," she concluded. The hearing continued for nearly an hour, diving into the intricacies of reform. By the time it ended, I felt emotionally wrung out, but also oddly hopeful. The panel members seemed genuinely determined to craft new legislation that would hold officers accountable. And as we stood to leave, Senator Ramirez called after us. "Ms. Portman, thank you. Your courage in coming forward will help drive real change here." Walking out of that hearing room, I exhaled a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. Maybe I truly had found my purpose amid all this chaos. If sharing my ordeal meant catalyzing reforms that saved even one person from living my nightmare, then it was worth the trembling hands, the lost sleep, and the heartbreak. In the days following my testimony, my schedule became a maze of interviews, meetings, and public engagements. Activists from various organizations, NAACP, the ACLU, and grassroots community groups invited me to speak at events. While part of me yearned to retreat into anonymity, I understood that my story carried momentum. People were listening, and maybe that wave of attention could push policymakers to act. One afternoon, I found a quiet moment in a park near Danielle's office. Birds chirped in the trees, the grass shimmering in sunlight. I sat on a bench, sipping a latte, reflecting on how much my life had changed in just a few short months. From an ordinary woman with a typical job, I'd become a central figure in a national conversation about police accountability. My phone buzzed, a text from Agent Carter. "We've arrested 2 more officers connected to Hackett's ring. Evidence strongly suggests a network of fabricated cases." I stared at the message, heart flooding with relief. Hackett's entire operation was unraveling fast. This was the hard karma I'd dreamed of. Every twisted lie the officers told was boomeranging back to crush them. I found myself smiling at the thought that maybe justice could indeed be served. Yet a pang of sadness undercut my satisfaction. For every crooked cop indicted, how many more had slipped through the cracks elsewhere? And what about the innocent souls who had no hidden camera to save them, no FBI operation to intervene? The enormity of it weighed on me. That evening, Danielle and I watched the nightly news. A segment covered Hackett's downfall, detailing how he and several conspirators faced charges ranging from perjury to obstruction of justice and assault. One reporter interviewed a man who claimed Hackett had framed him for gun possession 5 years ago. "I've been out on probation, but I lost my job. My family left me. I was labeled a criminal," he said, tears in his eyes. Hearing about Natalie Portman's case gives me hope that I might finally clear my name. My throat tightened. His life had been shattered, and I realized how precariously close I'd come to sharing a similar fate. The difference was that an undercover agent happened to be there that night. Pure luck. It made me want to fight harder to ensure that luck wasn't the only thing standing between an innocent person and a prison cell. Later, as I lay in bed, I scrolled through social media posts. My feed teemed with messages of encouragement from strangers, each with their own stories of police harassment or false arrests. Some were outraged on my behalf. Others shared personal nightmares. It was overwhelming, a digital confessional. But it also reinforced what Danielle had said. The movement for justice was bigger than any single individual. I replied to a few messages, thanking them for their support, acknowledging their pain. Then I set the phone aside, determined to rest. Tomorrow, I was scheduled to speak at a town hall forum, and I needed to muster every ounce of courage. Because while Hackett's fall symbolized progress, the real fight, transforming a broken system, was only just beginning. The Town Hall Forum took place in a historic community center known for hosting civil rights meetings in decades past. Wooden floors creaked underfoot, and faded photographs of past leaders adorned the walls. The atmosphere buzzed with anticipation as a diverse crowd gathered, local residents, activists, and even a few city officials who'd shown up to gauge the public mood. I stood at the front of the room behind a modest podium. Danielle was by my side, ever supportive, while Agent Carter observed quietly from the back, arms folded. Cameras from local news stations lined the rear, capturing every move. My hands felt clammy, but I steadied myself, recalling my mother's words. "Your voice matters." I began with a nod to the venue's significance. We stand here in a place that has borne witness to countless battles for equality and justice. Today, we continue that tradition as we address the urgent need for police reform. Eyes focused intently on me. I laid out my ordeal, how I was falsely charged, how the FBI exposed the truth, and how the scandal had triggered deeper investigations. Then I pivoted to the larger issue. My story, while personal, is far from unique. For years, certain officers have exploited systemic blind spots, lacking accountability measures and an over-reliance on their word. Innocent people, especially those from marginalized communities, have been jailed or otherwise traumatized. Today, we have a rare window of opportunity. With the FBI and DOJ investigating, with widespread public outrage, we must press for change. A young man in the audience raised his hand, tears brimming in his eyes as he introduced himself as Marcus. "My cousin's locked up right now, Mrs. Portman. He says the cops lied about him having drugs. After hearing your story, I'm sure that's what happened to him. How can we fight back?" My heart clenched. "Keep speaking up," I said gently. "Document everything. Reach out to civil rights attorneys, groups like the Innocence Project. The FBI tip lines are open, and I suspect they're building more cases if you can provide details. Public pressure helps. You are not alone. There are organizations and community leaders who will stand by you." Another woman stepped forward, voice trembling with anger. "I lost my son to police violence. They said he was armed, but witnesses said otherwise. No one believed us. You're lucky you had the FBI. Where was the FBI for my boy?" A lump formed in my throat. I had no easy answers for that heartbreak. "I'm so sorry. You deserved justice, and so did he. All I can say is that this moment might be our chance to push for real oversight. More cameras, more external reviews, mandatory release of footage, whatever it takes to keep the system honest." Applause rippled, muted by the weight of the tragedies shared in the room. Agent Carter nodded subtly in the back, as if to affirm that the Bureau was listening. When the forum ended, I was mobbed by people, each with a story or a plea. My chest felt heavy, absorbing so much collective pain, but my resolve hardened. This was bigger than me. These stories were the driving force behind meaningful reform. Outside, the night air greeted me, crisp and bracing. As I stepped onto the sidewalk, a woman I'd never met pressed a small note into my hand, whispering, "Thank you for fighting." The note read simply, "Keep going." And I vowed I would. Because after everything, my freedom nearly stolen, the police's deception, the FBI's timely intervention, I owed it to every voiceless victim to keep going, until the day we had a system that treated each person with the dignity and fairness they deserved. It's been months now since the court dismissed every charge against me. In many ways, my life feels unrecognizable compared to when I first walked into that courtroom, naive enough to think the truth would automatically protect me. My name, Natalie Portman, is now associated not just with the ordeal I went through, but with a broader fight for justice and accountability in law enforcement. As I look back, I realize that if I hadn't had the FBI step in with undeniable evidence, there's a strong chance I'd be languishing behind bars. The system I once trusted had pinned me as a villain with chilling efficiency. That reality continues to haunt me, but it also drives me. Since my case went public, I've been approached by people from all walks of life, some who were once staunch supporters of law and order, now questioning everything they believed. Others who'd always suspected the system could be manipulated by those in power, finally feeling validated. We've talked, cried, and strategized together. Our conversations are raw and honest, a testament to how one story can ignite thousands of revelations. Yes, I am angry at the months of terror, the lies told with brazen confidence, the near destruction of my future. But I also feel a sense of responsibility. My story is not singular. It represents countless others who never got the vindication I did. I owe it to them to keep this momentum going, to insist on reforms that ensure no one else endures the same nightmare. So, where do we go from here? My case may be closed, but the fight for genuine accountability has only begun. The FBI's evidence revealed a systemic problem, one that countless Americans have known for years. We need reforms that transcend quick fixes, body cams that are impossible to tamper with, independent oversight boards, comprehensive retraining, and a shift in how we measure policing success. I believe we each have a role to play, whether it's sharing our stories, supporting advocacy groups, or voting for leaders committed to meaningful reforms. Some might say that change within massive institutions is impossible, that corruption is too entrenched. Yet my own journey proves that a single instance of truth can dismantle towering lies. If we multiply that by thousands or millions, imagine the possibilities. Now I invite you to join this conversation. Have you seen or experienced situations where the police narrative seemed at odds with reality? Do you think technology like body cams should be more rigorously monitored to prevent tampering? How do we balance the honest, hard-working officers who risk their lives daily with the urgent need to root out those who misuse their power? Your opinions matter. Share your perspective, whether it's in the comment section of a platform, with your neighbors, or at community gatherings. Let's talk about the changes we want to see, and then take small but resolute steps toward them. Real justice demands our collective vigilance. It's not enough to assume the system will correct itself, because, as my story shows, it took extraordinary measures to expose one lie among many. I encourage you to reflect on your own communities, your own experiences. If you believe someone's voice has been silenced by a flawed system, stand with them, speak up, and let the power of collective truth light the way. Whether you're stirred by personal outrage or a desire for a better society, let that energy fuel productive discussions and actions. That's how we move forward, together, refusing to let corruption define us. In the end, my case became a catalyst rather than a tragedy, and I hope that for every individual who reads or hears my story, it sparks the same realization. We can hold even the mightiest systems accountable, one truth at a time. Let's keep going until justice is not a privilege but a promise fulfilled for all.